Now we're going to look at the second piece of the pie for durable skills, the second category, and that's critical thinking. And with critical thinking, what's important to remember is that builds off of the growth mindset, which builds off of the moral character. So we still want that foundation of moral character. Growth mindset allows you to change the way you look at things, look at yourself and your ability to change and grow and adapt. And then critical thinking opens you up to evaluate how you see things and not just take things at face value and not just go with the assumptions that you've always held. So what is critical thinking? Let's look at some of the components here. The first one is questioning assumptions. We all have assumptions. Life is based on assumptions. You assume when you get in the car it's going to start when you turn it on, that when you sit on a chair it's going to hold you. So we have to have assumptions, otherwise we couldn't live. But there's times when you're in a new situation, or if you're doing something and it's just not working out, rather than continuing to do the same thing over and over again, sometimes you have to challenge the assumptions that you have. And because they're by their nature, they're really deep inside of us, it's hard to even know what they are. We need to take some time to really think about what am I assuming as true in this situation? What can I challenge to see if this is actually true? Sometimes you need to talk to some other people, somebody who sees things differently than you, that can give you their view of how things go. Maybe you read about it from a different perspective than what you were raised with. And so we have to question the assumptions that we have, and sometimes that means coming to new conclusions in the long run. So it's a scary area to do. Critical thinking is difficult because you may have to change the way you've seen things. And so to do critical thinking, it's a process of working through seeing life from other directions. Now that can be a great thing if you're having a problem at work and you're creating something and it just isn't working for some reason. You might need to step back and say, what if? And look at it from a completely different perspective and try something that seems out of the ordinary or seems like it doesn't make sense, because the assumptions that you have about how this should work may be wrong. The next thing is to analyze evidence. We gather evidence from different perspectives, from trial and error, from doing testing, and we have to analyze that. And again, the assumptions can come into play here. People can see the same set of data and interpret it differently. We often interpret something according to what we already believe it's going to tell us. And so as you analyze that data, we have to do it with integrity. You have to do it from a perspective of being open to seeing what it really says and not just trying to use that to prove your point of view. Because critical thinking puts you in a situation where you're open to change. We have to evaluate different perspectives. There's some great stories in history of times when leaders just surrounded themselves with people that were just like them, that saw the world the way they see it, and they were basically just yes men for them. And what happened was they ended up having colossal failures because they were approaching something from a perspective that didn't allow them to see other options that might happen. And some of the best leaders actually put people on their team who see things differently than them, who have a different worldview than they do. And their purpose is to question them, to say, what about this? Are you sure that that's the best? Because what if we took it from this perspective? Have you thought about this side? And even though that seems to slow things down in the process, it can save all kinds of time and money in the long run. So if you're going to involve yourself in critical thinking, you might need to find people who see the world differently than you and allow them to be part of your team and allow yourself to listen to them and even let them challenge you. I worked with a guy a while back who was really good at this, but he ended up, well, I really shouldn't say the president didn't like being questioned, the president of the company. And so eventually she got rid of him. And the problem was, he was a really good stabilizing factor. He caused people to think about the outcomes of their decisions and helped alleviate a lot of long-term problems. But this president didn't like somebody questioning her, and so she eventually demoted him to the point where he moved on somewhere else, and it was a big loss for the company. So you need to be willing to have people question you and actually encourage it so that you can move forward, so that you can think critically and create strong products. And the last thing I have here is to recognize implicit biases. Implicit biases, it's a little bit hard to define, but they're the things that are inside of you that you assume to be true, and especially when you think about them in light of other people. Let's say that you're in a parking lot in a town that you're not familiar with, and as you're walking out to your car at nighttime, there's a guy walking next to you or just a little bit behind you, and he's wearing a suit and tie. Odds are good you're probably not going to feel uncomfortable. But what if that same person was a young male and he had on a hoodie and his hood was up and his hands were in his pockets and you couldn't see his face very well? You may end up feeling uncomfortable because you're not sure of who he is because of your implicit biases that somebody like that is probably up to no good. We had a friend who was raised in Detroit. She was my wife's roommate in college. And at the time, we lived up north Michigan. And she was very nervous to come visit us. In fact, she would tell us that anytime she got north of Saginaw, she got scared because she didn't know what to expect when it was all woods and no cities and buildings and all that. So she had an implicit bias against up north folks because she didn't know who they were and didn't trust them. And the same thing happens for people from up there, that if they go down to the city, if they're in downtown Saginaw or if they're in inner city Detroit or just in a metropolitan area in general, they might be a lot more nervous because they don't trust something they're not familiar with. So we have to be willing, again, part of that high moral character is being honest with yourself. You have to be willing to be aware of and question those biases that you have about other people, whether they're different nationalities, different sex, different raised in the country or in the city, whatever it happens to be, somebody who's richer than you, somebody who's poorer than you. You have to be open to question those biases and see what might be true about people so that you can move forward freely and not be stuck in that. Because if we ignore critical thinking, we end up being stuck in the same place and never move on. The last piece of the puzzle that we're going to look at is leadership. So until then, have a great day.